the Army's on the path towards this 21st century Army in support of a 21st century national defense strategy with really legacy 20th century sustainment technology.
Hello, everyone. I am Captain Justin Command, and welcome to another episode of Battlefield Next, a podcast devoted to the application of law to the future of armed conflict. Today, we have the honor of hosting the 56th Quartermaster General of the United States Army, Brigadier General Michelle Donahue. A graduate of Duke University, General Donahue also holds advanced degrees from Georgetown and the National Defense University. Today, Brigadier General Donahue will talk to us about her varied roles in the sustainment community, a bit about the future of sustainment, and her view of the role of the judge advocate in large-scale combat operations, especially as they pertain to sustainment. Ma'am, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Battlefield Next. We appreciate you making the trip down from up from Fort Lee to the Nolan Reading Room here in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Thanks, Justin. I really appreciate, you asking me to come up here today. But, for all those out there listening today, please know that, I have a little bit of experience here with Justin. He was one of our company commanders in the Quartermaster School, as I tell people who knew that the Quartermaster School trains all of our paralegals out there. And so I'm honored to be here in your presence as well, and as we explore the future of sustainment and any other further questions about what I expect from the JAG Corps.
Well, thanks, ma'am. And I always felt like I was an honorary member of the Quartermaster Corps, so I appreciate it. And as we start today, ma'am, really what I'd like to start with is maybe a little bit of insight of who you are, even before you were Lieutenant Donahue. Who were you, ma'am, and where are you from?
So I was the daughter of an Air Force officer. I moved around quite a bit, lived overseas, spent some formative years out in Malaysia. Was out there kind of my 8th, 9th, 10th grade, and the international school system out there. And then my dad was the Air Force attaché out there. And then we came back to D.C. He was immersed into the Spanish language, and then we moved down into Venezuela. And I always say that I had the honor maybe of being subjected to Hugo Chavez's first coup attempt down in Venezuela back in 1992. But what that meant was I then found myself back in D.C. To kind of finish high school back there. And so I had visions back then of going to attend the Air Force Academy. But the summer before, before we moved down to Venezuela, I had visited Duke. And so I found, so when I found myself back in Annandale, Virginia, back at this high school, living with family friends, it was kind of March Madness and Duke, Kentucky game. And so I watched that infamous Christian Laettner shot back in 1992. And so I kind of walked away from that, saw all the Cameron crazies and said, I think I want to go to Duke.
I feel like that moment, right?
That whole
recruit
moment.
Anybody.
It would have. And so I called my father and said, hey, Dad, I'm turning down the Air Force Academy, and I'm going to accept this Army ROTC scholarship to go to Duke. And he was a little bit taken aback, but the Air Force said to me, well, if you want to go to Duke, you have to be a computer science major, and that was not up my alley. So I accepted that Army ROTC scholarship and found myself down at Duke University and had an incredible time, and still very much in awe of Coach K. Right, so I was, he always approached the Cameron crazies as the sixth man on his team, and so that whole entire team is greater than the sum of all of its parts. I think he really looks at all of his players as not individual stars, because they are, but really, how do I get the best out of a team? And so I took a lot of that away. I was actually reflecting on that. I have a picture in my office of the two of us. I was very fortunate to work for a senior leader that allowed me the opportunity to, who was also very close to Coach K. And so, but on that photo that I have autographed, he says, thanks for being on our team, right? That again, that Cameron crazy part that propels Duke to success, but also the follow your heart, right? And so I've always kind of said, you've got to obviously think with your head, but you have to follow your heart. And so I think that both that teamwork piece, but also just leading with your heart, I think has been kind of the two formative things that I've kind of taken with me throughout my career so far.
And pretty surreal as his storied career
Absolutely.
Comes to an end this year, too.
It does, yes. So I hope Duke beats UVA this year. But
there could be a storybook finished this year, ma'am. So
they're good.
We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but in addition to that, right, just from another piece of who I am obviously a dual military spouse, married to a medical service corps officer. Met my husband as a young lieutenant in Europe, and we have traveled the world together and really been a part of this Army career together for this for our entire career so far.
And as you entered the Army, ma'am, what was it? Did you know what you wanted to do in the Army? Was that sort of dictated for you, or were you leaning one way or another when you first started out that Army career?
So I think when I was a cadet, I initially went off to Duke thinking I was going to go be a pre-med student, and actually got to the point where I ended up with an ed delay as part of the accessions piece with a medical service corps as kind of my backup plan. And I went home so my parents were still in Venezuela at that point in time, and so went home my senior year, kind of came back from that and thought, wow, I'm not sure I really want to be a doctor. And it's kind of that long career path out there with residency and years of med school. So I actually came back and begged then to branch transfer. And the way I looked at that was, from a quartermaster perspective, was really the only branch at the time back in 1992 that was sort of equal opportunities to all members of the Corps. And, because most, even in being an ordnance lieutenant at the time, you couldn't be far forward inside of a maneuver battalion at the time when they had support platoons as a female. And so that's really honestly why, one, I decided I didn't want to be a doctor, and two, that I sort of wanted to be able to kind of come in with equal opportunities.
Right, and throughout that career, are there some assignments that you believe have shaped you along the way, and then relatedly, are there some assignments that were particularly challenging for you, ma'am?
Yeah, so I think I've had this really, in some cases, a very storied career, right? I've been able to serve at really tactical, operational, strategic levels. Had the opportunity very early on to apply for the JCS internship program, which then allowed me, after company command, to go off to Georgetown to basically receive undertake a policy management study there, and then to serve on the joint staff as well as the Army staff. On the joint staff, was able to serve inside of the chairman's office for legislative affairs, which really just took a ton of leadership lessons away from that experience. I was there at the time when Secretary Rumsfeld was sort of on his way out and Secretary Gates came in. That was a very interesting dynamic in Congress at the time. So just really learned a lot from that. And then went down into the Army staff to work for then General Dunwoody when she was the Army G4. Again, a very tremendous leadership opportunity to work for her and really to be inside of her SIG to see, just really how does a senior leader think? From there, I went off to do kind of normal KD major opportunities, Battalion SPO, Battalion XO. And then I found myself back in the Pentagon. I always say, most people sort of shy away from the Pentagon. I probably have more Pentagon tours than most people. But I found myself and back in that opportunity to go work for another senior leader. And so I was very fortunate to go work for General Dempsey when he was the 37th Chief of Staff of the Army, and then when he was the 18th Chairman. And I say that to me was probably one of the most formative experiences that I had, because it was really inside of a leadership laboratory. Just watching him interact all day long with people, with foreign dignitaries, with interagency personnel. And and then traveling the world with both he and his wife was just, it was such a joy just to watch how a senior leader is able to solicit, those nuggets of information that he needs at that tactical level to help inform him at the strategic level.
And maybe a case of serendipity, ma'am, but I just finished reading, and I promise you this was not any type of brown nosing, but I just finished reading No Time for Spectators.
Yeah.
And sure enough, I see a call out to a then Major Michelle Donahue, and maybe at least from his perspective, a potentially difficult position that you found yourself in,
Yeah.
and wondering if you could share kind of with our listeners both that challenge and the leadership lessons that you imparted on General Dempsey and what he imparted back to you, man.
So it was interesting. I was this kind of a unique role and a special assistant role to him and to his wife as well, right? And so, really the military family role perspective. But I also had the opportunity. It's funny. I was always the one that had the opportunity to give him all the bad news. And so some of the time it was the bad news from our lawyers there on the joint staff. And so we'd always
the lawyers,
the lawyers, right?
And
so, but as as the young major, junior lieutenant colonel, having to staff all of his trips from a legal perspective and making sure that all of his spouse travel was coordinated and all those had the appropriate legal reviews to include all of his quarters dinners and anything that he hosted. And so, so every time I would walk into his office, it was either, all right, how can we not get to yes today in something he wanted to accomplish or some sort of end state that he wanted to get after, or also even from spouse perspective, as we were tackling really challenging military family issues. And so at the time, this was the start of sequestration, and we had just been out on the road, and a lot of feedback from spouses about military childcare. And so I knew that he was that he was going to host a tank, and that they were really in sort of this cutting of programs for military families. And so he had made the promise to his spouse, which helped me, I think, that he was going to make sure that the child care centers were not cut. And so I'd gotten wind that I think the J8 on the joint staff was going to propose that was one of the cuts that they made. And so I went in and very patiently asked to sort of speak my mind and to let him know that that this was important to military families, and I really felt like, one, he had told his spouse, and so I wasn't going to be the one to go back and tell her that that he was going to cut this program, but that at the end of the day, that I felt that this was something that he needed to fall on his sword for. And so it was I was kind of standing in front of his MacArthur desk and sort of sir, you have to address this problem set, and you can't walk away from this problem. And so in the book, he it was interesting when he sent me an advance copy of the book, and I can tell you I read that book one night, devoured the whole thing, but I was there probably late that night. I mean, I had like tears in my eyes, but late that night, and I got to that section, and all I did was cry, because it was just, I was like, oh my God, I don't think I ever really truly understood that I had such that impact on him. But he looks at that as, clearly that was, character forming, but also, definitely a formative experience in both of our relationships. But again, he is just an incredible man, and I think of them as parents, and they are really definitely just inspiring leaders, and still today, I mean, he continues to give back.
Yeah, something special, man, when you can see impact flow both ways,
Absolutely.
Right? And it's not dependent on rank or grade, and you see true, actual, humble impact just flow. Can I shift to today? Your role as the Quartermaster Commandant, the Quartermaster General, and what it is you do in that role, and also the role of the Quartermaster Corps as a whole.
So most people don't know. So 16 June, 1775. There's a couple of branches that were formed on 16 June. Some of those things that we needed, right? So the Finance Corps, the AG Corps, the Quartermaster Corps, right? And so you need obviously supplies, and the Engineer Corps. So those are really the four, besides infantry as obviously being the oldest, but those four branches. So we always kind of say, well, clearly you needed supplies. So we were people were worried about their stomachs and needing food and all those things. So we always sort of say we're the second oldest branch out there, but you could probably argue we're tied for second, right? But we've answered that call for almost 246 years to provide aerial delivery, petroleum and water, supply, mortuary affairs, and subsistence, and really in every war, conflict, and campaign. And so I'm just, I'm proud to obviously be the Quartermaster General, but just to ensure that from a sustainment perspective that we can continue to, deliver that operational reach for the warfighter. But we also have the responsibility just for capability development, the integration of doctrine, force structure, leader development, for example, and then also the development of all the material solutions for the Corps.
How has this assignment varied, or how has this been a different assignment from some of your other, maybe more traditional, or even some of those assignments at the Pentagon? Has this one been more or less of a challenge for you?
So I think I was really fortunate when I came out of Sustainment Brigade Command in Europe from the 16th Sustainment Brigade over there. I had the opportunity to go back into the Army G8 and be a hardware division chief up in G8 Force Development. I think what that allowed me, and by the way, I had no clue what I was doing when I came in there. I would say I probably learned more in that year about the Army, about our acquisition programs, about how the entire ASALT, really the acquisition enterprise works. I learned more in that year than probably the last 10 years, right? Because it was just different. It was different material, right? Just kind of a different, it was the first time I'd really been exposed to a lot of that stuff. And so, but when I came down from to CASCOM from that job, General Fogg at the time thought, wow, I'm going to take your experience up there because now as we say, now you know where all the bodies are buried, so to speak, right? You know where all of this equipment is funded, how it's funded. You know all of the material programmatics with each of those material programs. And so I'm going to carry that on to make sure that we remain synchronized and that you can continue to drive and push all of those initiatives so that we really can make sure that we deliver on what was funded and what had been previously funded and what we're continuing to fund now.
And shifting a bit now to the future of Sustainment, the future of the Quartermaster Corps, what do you envision are the near-term challenges and the near-term opportunities for your Corps, ma'am?
So I think we always say the speed of supported, or the speed of support has to really catch up to the speed of the supported, right? And so we are putting all these financial investments and programmatic investments into really the Army's 31+4 programs. Those are really centered around the cross-functional teams that were stood up by Army Futures Command. I think the problem with that is that you are on the path, or the Army's on the path towards this 21st century Army in support of a 21st century national defense strategy with really legacy 20th century sustainment technology. And so I think we have to make sure that the investments that we need for, whether it's the Waypoint Force, as the Army is kind of creating this Waypoint Force to 2028, 2029, and then this Aimpoint Force that AFC is creating for 2035, that we make sure that we're thinking differently about how we sustain that future fight. And so whether it's large-scale combat operations or whether it's in a multi-domain or a joint all-domain environment, making sure that we have put investments into artificial intelligence and machine learning, and that we have UAS and robotics capability that can really we can mitigate the gaps between longer lines of communications, more frequent displacement opportunities that formations are we're going to have to be on the move. So how do you ensure that you can sustain a formation on the move with just thinking differently? We've got to put we definitely have to start thinking about operational energy environment, and obviously climate change is a big one out there too. But how do you how do we sort of focus on the electrification efforts of vehicles and thinking differently just about energy? We're working on a project right now with DARPA. Well, really DARPA's working on a project, and we're putting a lot of big bets into some water technology that they're working on, where we could in theory eliminate the legacy water buffaloes and hippo distribution based off of the molecular technology that they're working on, which is really, think of, for me, it's really a game-changing world technology, right? Where you could kind of have a canteen that has molecular structure inside of that canteen that's magically creating water for you to drink. Think about what that would do just from an NGO perspective down in Africa. But for us, it'll totally change how we distribute water, and then really from a warfighter perspective, how do you enable them at the point of need? How do we think about how we deliver food differently? Is that 3D food printing? I always joke about the Israelis; they're already printing steaks, right? So how do you get to the point where you can take the molecular biology, and you can think differently about how you sustain that warfighter at the tactical edge. So those are some of the things that we have to continue to work with Army Futures Command as they pour investments in S&T dollars into those labs. But then what programs do we see as coming over into the acquisition realm that we need to then fund?
Ma'am, do you see that's sort of some of the, future capabilities and ways to support a force of 2028 or 2035 in multi-domain operations? But do you see any of that technology trickling down to the training mission at Fort Lee, or does the training mission and the basics of that mission stay relatively the same because the basics are the basics are the basics?
I mean, in terms of MDO and LISCO, it's making sure that, from an AIT perspective, that we're training the basics. They understand the mechanics of their equipment. They understand, and they are truly ready to operate all of the pieces of equipment that they're trained on, really on, day one of integration. They may need other things that they have to work on, like driver's training and other things at that first unit of assignment. But they are trained on the basics. And I don't see that changing. I do see changes at ALC and SLC as we think differently about, one, the delivery of the education, but also trying to challenge NCOs to be better integrated with our staffs, so that they're fully prepared to be able to do MDMP. I used to challenge our non-commissioned officers in Europe because of what we had to sustain across the entire European continent. I couldn't rely on single MOSs to be SMEs in that experience. They had to cross train. And so from a quartermaster perspective, we're actually working on a merger actually at the E8 level right now, where I kind of get after a multifunctional quartermaster non-commissioned officer. And so I do see a lot of changes in how we empower our non-commissioned officers and to our warrant officers as well, really making sure they're grounded inside of that technical expertise. So I think some changes back at the schoolhouse, but I think we always make sure that, at least on the modernization side for the material, that's integrated into what the future design of that POI is.
And outside of the Quartermaster Corps, outside of the sustainment world, ma'am, I want to talk a little bit about judge advocates. How you view, generally, how you have viewed the role of the judge advocate in your various echelons of command, and has that changed or evolved throughout your career? We always often joke in the JAG Corps that usually more junior commanders don't really like seeing their lawyers, and hopefully as they become more senior, they're more willing to engage and see a little bit more of the value in their JAs. But what's the experience been like for you, man?
So I always look back, and I think as a battalion commander, I was really, really fortunate. I had a very well disciplined formation. I know that's sort of maybe hard to believe, but I had and I had I had an incredible relationship with our BGA, I still have comms with my trial counsel as well as with my BGA from when I was battalion commander. But I don't know that I had a ton of interaction versus when I look back as being a Sustainment Brigade commander and how much interaction my battalion commanders had with our BGA team. I think maybe the difference in Europe is that we were working more of both, whether it's military justice or in both sides of military justice and operational law. But, as I always joke with, I've great Sam Beckett quote, right? Ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. And, that fail better approach became kind of our mantra for 16th Sustainment Brigade because, boy, soldiers can do some crazy things, right? And especially over in Europe, I remember my first week in command, and I had soldiers that decided, there's like one turn up between, you go from Poland into Lithuania, and it's like if you go left, you go into the Suwalki Gap and into Lithuania, and if you go right, you go into Belarus, right? And I remember getting a frantic call that was like, you have some soldiers that are being held up by some Belarusian guards, and I was like, this is not good. So I think in Europe, from my BGA's perspective, is I found they really had to be integrated very, very closely. Obviously, all of our MDMP exercises, but making sure they understood the concept of support, that they understood where the friction was going to be, and they understood what was happening at the USERA level so that they could kind of help me see around the corners there for where we had to start to potentially mitigate, right? So whether it was engaging, through the embassy, like working with the legal team back at the embassy to help mitigate, hey, I really need the ambassador to make this phone call so that I can get this ammunition through Austria to be able to get there so that I don't have an exercise with our Romanian partners, sort of not happen. And so I just think that there was, at least over there, I really felt that there was this really close nexus between the two.
Yeah, that's an important point I think you make, ma'am, is that I'm sure that there are times where sustainers see themselves as serving a client, and attorneys always see themselves as serving some client. But it's important what you mentioned of attorneys knowing the client they're serving. A BJA's role in a brigade combat team might be different than the BJA's role on a sustainment brigade, and you have to know what your client wants in order to best serve that client.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think too, I mean, it's, I think just that trust factor too, right? I mean, I had two incredible BJs when I was over there. Very lucky. I always say I'm sort of, maybe I have like this, sort of blessed, right? But I always end up with just these incredible teams. But I was really able to work through a lot of those problem sets with them, and really, from a trust factor, but also I think they knew where my head was, and in both of us getting to know each other, so that they knew the questions I was going to ask. I like to sort of talk through problem sets. Sometimes that scares people, but I think really working through, looking at the end game, try to work yourself backwards. Figuring out the multiple COAs that you could, approach for many different problems, whether it's on the op law side or whether it's on the MJ side, and thinking through those so that you don't just sort of stumble your way through, and then you find yourself having to make decisions that you don't want to make because you didn't think through the end state. And, and in their case, they weren't involved in MDMP. And so you end up finding yourselves, they were, but but if they weren't, then you find yourselves in a predicament that you really can't get yourself out of. And so I think that just that integration and I think too, they both had different skill sets, different backgrounds, but I think understanding who they needed to call over there, that they knew they could reach up to 21st TSC, they knew they could reach out to 173rd, and there was this network of BJAs, but then even up into the USRA structure as well, and all the way up to where you knew from the USRA, SJ at the time, what John Cavoli was even thinking about. And so, and knew that you could, where could you take a little bit of risk to be able to meet commander's intent. And so I think that was really powerful too. Just that network of networks approach.
And is there any other, I guess you'd say, character traits or something that you want to see in your JA? Are there personality traits or character traits that you say are must-haves?
Obviously, you all are competent, right? I think it's, providing candor, providing honest assessments. I would sort of stress that even as young lieutenants, like, don't be afraid. It's kind of like that moment with General Dempsey, right? Being able to come in and not be intimidated by the rank, and being able to say, hey, this is, here are your left-right limits. I can help you get to yes, but understand left-right, you got to stay inside of this, this parameter, just not really being intimidated, but, quick, obviously all quick studies, but, I don't know, it's probably caught me off guard there for a minute, but, just because I've been so blessed by such great lawyers, right? I don't know what other traits out there that I want out of them, because they were all fabulous. Just being inquisitive, being candid, honest. I was asked a question yesterday, and I know this is kind of a random parallel, but by a lieutenant, first, a bullet graduate, or soon to be bullet graduate, who's a former non-commissioned officer, and how do you sort of bridge that divide between the two? And I think you have to go in as a young trial counsel. You don't know a lot. Go spend time with the company commander. Go live that. Go walk a day in that company commander's shoes. Right. Understand, back to your client. Right. How does your client operate? Being willing to get out of your comfort zone is probably helpful.
Well, Ma'am, thank you. This has been awesome, and I really sincerely appreciate you sharing with us not only your lessons learned from your career, but your lessons for the future force, and especially your lessons for judge advocates, because it is absolutely vital for us to get the perspective of those that we serve within the Army. And so we sincerely appreciate you coming down today, ma'am.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Best
ma'am.
of luck to you, too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Interested in providing material to the JAG Corps' Future Concepts Directorate? Reach out to us via Twitter or LinkedIn at JAGFCD, or visit our website at tjaglix.army.mil/FCD. That's tjaglcs.army.mil/FCD. Always on the lookout for the next guest, topic, or discussion. As always, the views expressed on the podcast are the views of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center and School, the United States Army, the Department of Defense, or any other agency of the United States government. Reference in this podcast to any specific commercial product, process, or service, or the use of any trade, firm, or corporation name is for the information and convenience of the public and does not constitute endorsement, recommendation, or favoring by the Department of Defense. For the JAG Corps' Future Concepts Directorate, I am Captain Justin Command. Thanks for joining us on Battlefield Next.